Hello, everyone. What if I told you some of the weirdest, funniest, and most unbelievable events in history actually happened? Here are 8 shocking facts you've probably never heard. And if this blows your mind, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing history. Number 8. The Bay of Pigs invasion. The failed attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba was planned by none other than President Dwight D. Eisenhower while he was still in office. However, due to his poor health, he left it up to his successor, John F. Kennedy, to actually pull the trigger on the plan. As we now know, the invasion was an absolute disaster and resulted in the deaths of 17 Americans and the capture of more than 1,000 others. But what many people do not realize is that this botched operation was only the beginning of a much larger conflict that would last for nearly 2 decades. In fact, America's attempts to get rid of Fidel Castro would continue all the way through the Nixon administration. During this time, they would fund hundreds of covert operations designed to destabilize Castro's regime, including training anti-Castro Cubans, arming them with the latest American weapons, and then sending them back into Cuba to do their dirty work. But despite all the money, weapons, and manpower that the CIA threw at this problem, none of these efforts would ever come close to succeeding. And by the time it was all said and done, America would end up spending over $3 billion trying to get rid of one man. That's the equivalent of almost $25 billion today. 7. No slavery clause. While researching for an upcoming video about the Louisiana Purchase, I came across some pretty interesting stuff. Did you know, for example, that Napoleon had initially intended to keep a significant portion of the land for himself? This was because he had plans to make New Orleans the new capital of France. He also envisioned creating a massive slave empire in the region, with over 1 million slaves working on plantations owned by French aristocrats. Fortunately for everyone involved, those plans never came to fruition. But what's even weirder is that Napoleon didn't include a no-slavery clause in the treaty. In fact, he specifically stated that any future owner of the territory could do with the slaves as they pleased. This was obviously a big mistake on his part, since it allowed for the possibility of slavery continuing in the region. And when you consider the fact that France was supposedly the most civilized country in the world at that point in history, it really makes you wonder what kind of atrocities were taking place behind closed doors. 6. The Trojan War. If you've ever wondered why the ancient Greeks went to such great lengths to bury their garbage, then look no further than this bizarre bit of history. You see, in ancient Greece, the concept of public sanitation was unheard of. As a result, the streets of their cities were absolutely filthy, and the citizens had no choice but to live in filth. To make matters worse, they were constantly plagued by deadly diseases like cholera and typhoid fever. So, in order to escape all this grime and disease, the wealthy elite would build elaborate underground tunnels and chambers where they could store their garbage out of sight and out of mind. These garbage dumps were often decorated with marble walls and even had ventilation shafts to keep the stench at bay. And believe it or not, they were so popular that some wealthy Greeks even built second homes just for the sole purpose of getting away from all the garbage in their main residence. Talk about a first-world problem. Number 5. Emperor Hirohito of Japan. When you think of World War II, the name Hirohito probably isn't the first to come to mind. But this Japanese emperor played a much larger role in the conflict than most people realize. For starters, he was the figurehead of the entire Japanese military machine, and as such, his approval was required for any major military action. This included the attack on Pearl Harbor, which officially brought the United States into the war. But what's even more shocking is that Hirohito may have had a hand in planning the war itself. You see, he was a big fan of Western culture and had studied the writings of influential thinkers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Nietzsche. In fact, he even kept a copy of Mein Kampf on his bedside table. Some historians believe that he was so enamored with Nazi Germany that he purposely allowed the Japanese military to drag the nation into war. But whether or not this is true will likely never be known since Hirohito was never held accountable for his actions during the war. 4. Dead man voting. Imagine if someone tried to vote in the next election but was told that they couldn't because they were dead. It sounds ridiculous, right? Well, in 2018, a man named James Garfield Walker Jr. found himself in exactly that situation. And the reason for this bizarre turn of events goes all the way back to 1904, when Walker's great-great-grandfather, William McKinley Walker, voted in the presidential election. At the time, voting was still done with paper ballots, which were often not properly secured after being cast. This meant that they could easily be tampered with or even stolen altogether. So when William died shortly after casting his ballot, his son ended up using his ballot to cast another vote for the same candidate. And somehow this scheme went unnoticed for over 100 years. Eventually, the dead man's identity was discovered and his votes were disqualified. But not before making headlines around the country. Number 3, the Oregon Territory. As the saying goes, God created Illinois, and Mark Twain wrote the rest. But what if I told you that Mark Twain's most famous work of fiction was actually based on real events that took place in the Oregon Territory during the mid-19th century? It's true. You see, in 1848, a group of settlers in the Oregon Territory decided to establish their own independent government in defiance of U.S. rule. They called it the Provisional Government of the Oregon Territory, and it lasted for just over a year before being dissolved and annexed into the United States. But during that short time, it became one of the freest places on Earth, with its constitution guaranteeing things like free public education, abolition of slavery, and women's suffrage. All very progressive ideas for the time period. What makes this story especially bizarre, though, is that many historians believe the provisional government was secretly backed by British agents who were hoping to start a war with the United States over control of the territory. Whether or not this is true will likely never be known. But what's interesting is that both Britain and America had been eyeing the region as a potential site for a new canal route to the Pacific Ocean. Could this have been the real reason behind the Oregon Uprising? Who knows? Number 2, Russian Revolution. If you've ever taken a class on the Russian Revolution, then you probably remember learning about Vladimir Lenin and his role in overthrowing the Tsarist government. What you probably don't remember is that Lenin wasn't even in Russia when this happened. He was actually in exile in Switzerland at the time. So how did he manage to lead the Bolshevik Party to victory? The answer is propaganda. See, while Lenin was in exile, he wrote a series of articles outlining his vision for a communist Russia. These articles were then smuggled back into the country and disseminated among the general public. And by the time the revolution broke out, Lenin's ideas had taken root, and the people were ready for change. Of course, once the revolution was complete, Lenin wasted no time in returning to Russia, where he would go on to become one of the most powerful men in the world. 1. Ancient Greek Olympics. The ancient Olympic Games were a major event in the ancient Greek world, attracting athletes from all over the Mediterranean. But what many people do not realize is that the Olympics aren't always the celebration of peace and unity that we know today. In fact, they were often marred by violence and political controversy. For starters, the ancient Olympics were only open to male athletes, meaning that women were not allowed to compete or even attend the games. This, of course, would change in the modern era. But it's just one example of how the ancient Olympics were very different from the games we know today. Another major difference was that the ancient Olympics were often used as a platform for settling political disputes between city-states. For example, in 668 BC, the Thebans and Corinthians got into a massive fight that nearly turned into a full-blown war. The Corinthians had just defeated the Thebans in battle, and they were using the Olympics as a chance to rub it in their faces. The Thebans, of course, were not having it, and they ended up killing several members of the Corinthian delegation. Needless to say, this incident led to a massive brawl that nearly turned into a full-blown war between the two city-states. It was eventually settled with the Corinthians withdrawing their complaints in exchange for some minor concessions from the Thebans. Which of these historical facts did you find the most surprising? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more fun history videos. I'll see you next time. Bye.